Have you ever been in a conversation and suddenly realized you're bored? Even worse. Have you noticed that the other person is also bored? I've been in those situations many times. I've experienced awkward silences. Forced small talk. More. The nagging feeling that you're not connecting with anyone. But here's the hard truth: if your conversations are boring, it's because you're playing it safe. You're sticking to the script society hands out, the one that says don't offend. Don't challenge. For God's sake. Don't be real. I used to think that being nice and agreeable was the way to keep people interested. I'd smile. Nod. Avoid saying anything that might upset them. But you know what? That's exactly what made me forgettable. It wasn't until I started embracing discomfort. Asking the tough questions. Speaking my mind. Even when it made people uncomfortable. That I realized that conversations don't have to be boring. They shouldn't be e.so. If you're tired of being the person others politely tolerate but never remember, stick around. I'm about to share some controversial tips that will make sure you're never boring in conversation again. Ready to break some rules? Let's dive in. Speak with purpose. Don't waste words. How many times have you walked away from a conversation thinking, what was the point of that? I used to do it all the time. I would ramble on about trivial nonsense, filling the air with words just because I was uncomfortable with silence. Here's the kicker: the more you talk without a purpose, the more you dilute your value. Every word you say should have weight. It should matter. Otherwise, you're just contributing to the noise that fills everyone's lives. I had to learn this the hard way. I remember a time when I was at a networking event trying to make a good impression. I talked a lot, thinking that if I kept the conversation going, people would see me as interesting and engaged. But the more I talked, the more I realized that no one was really listening. My words were like background music, pleasant, maybe, ultimately forgettable. That's when it hit me: I was boring because I wasn't saying anything meaningful. I'm just talking to fill the silence. Here's the controversial part. Stop talking just to be polite. Seriously. If you don't have something meaningful to say, don't say anything at all. This goes against everything we're taught. Society drills into us that being chatty and sociable is the key to being liked. That's a lie. In reality, people don't remember the person who talks the most. They remember the one who says something that sticks with them. Think about it. When was the last time you remembered the person who said something meaningful? What was the last time someone said something that really touched you? It probably wasn't just some random conversation about the weather. It was probably a conversation where every word was chosen carefully, where the person speaking wasn't afraid to also listen. That's the kind of impact you want to have. Here's my advice. Speak less. When you do speak, make it count. Don't waste your breath on meaningless chatter. If you're in a conversation and you don't have anything to say, here's a tip: be purposeful. It's better to hold back than to speak too much. This doesn't mean being aloof or uninterested. It means valuing your words and recognizing that when you do speak, people will listen. Your silence will make them pay attention. Your words will have more impact because they won't be drowned out by a flood of empty sentences. I started applying this mindset. The change was immediate. Instead of trying to impress people with the quantity of my words, I focused on the quality. I spoke less. I made sure to listen more and that my contributions were valuable. As a result, people started paying attention. They valued my input because it was clear that I wasn't just talking for the sake of talking. I was speaking with purpose. Stop being like everyone else. Speak with intention. Make your words matter. Watch as your conversations go from boring to memorable. It's not about how much you say. It's about saying something that's impossible. Don't ignore tattoos. Ask deep questions. Go beyond the surface. Ever catch yourself stuck in a loop of superficial small talk? Wondering why the conversation feels so empty? I've been there. 2. Endless chats about the weather. What someone did over the weekend. How busy they've been at work. It's as if we're all following some unwritten script. Afraid to deviate from the safe, shallow waters of polite conversation. Here's the reality: if you stay on the surface, you'll never. To really connect with someone, you need to ask questions that go beyond the surface. These questions might make people uncomfortable. They're the ones that lead to deeper, more meaningful conversations. At first, this was hard for me. I used to talk about the usual stuff, thinking that being light-hearted was the key to being likable. But I quickly realized that these conversations left me feeling disconnected. Like I was missing an opportunity to truly understand the person in front of me. One day, after yet another mind, I decided to try something different. Instead of asking how someone's day is going like I usually do, I asked them a different question. I tried something different. I asked people what the most challenging thing they've faced this year was. They reacted immediately. The other person paused, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. But then something amazing happened. They opened up. Here's where it gets controversial. Most people avoid deep questions because they're afraid of the answers. They're afraid of the answers. They're afraid of making others uncomfortable or exposing something raw, but that's exactly why you should ask them. Superficial questions lead to superficial connections that if you want to stand out, if you want your conversations to be memorable, you have to be willing to break through the veneer of politeness. You have to dig deep to find out what a person is really thinking and what their life is like. Asking deep questions is about more than just getting to know someone better. It shows that you care enough to explore what really matters. When you ask someone about their challenges, their fears, their dreams, you're showing that you care. You're not just looking for the surface, you want to understand them more deeply. That's how real connections are made, but be careful, not everyone is ready for this level of conversation. That's okay. Some people might move away from these questions because they feel uncomfortable with the level of honesty required. You're not interested in just surface-level conversations. You want to understand people on a deeper level. That's where real connections are formed. Be warned, not everyone is ready for this level of conversation. That's okay. Some people might shy away because they're not comfortable with the vulnerability that deep questions require. Those who do engage will appreciate the authenticity and courage it takes to steer the conversation into uncharted territory. They'll remember you not as someone who exchanged pleasantries, as someone who dared to ask the questions that really matter. So, how do you do it? Start by replacing generic questions with ones that invite deeper reflection. Instead of asking, "How was your weekend?" try, "What's something you learned about yourself recently?" Instead of, "What do you do for work?" ask, "What drives you to do what you do?" These kinds of questions might catch people off guard. That's the point. You're breaking them out of the autopilot mode. Most of us only ask surface-level questions. If you ask deep questions, you'll see people respond differently. They'll open up more, share meaningful insights. The conversation will become more engaging and fulfilling for both of you. It's not about prying or being nosy, it's about showing genuine interest. Interest in the other person's inner world. I remember a time when I asked someone what their biggest fear was. I expected a simple answer. They revealed a deep concern about failure that they'd never shared before. This was a turning point in our relationship. From that moment on, our conversations were no longer about small things. About the important, sometimes messy parts of life. That's the power of deep questions. In the end, asking deep questions is about leaving the ordinary behind and stepping into a space where real connections can be made. It's about being bold enough to steer the conversation towards what truly matters. Show that you're not afraid to talk about what's important to you. So, next time you're talking to someone, don't just talk about easy topics. Ask questions that make people think. Watch as your conversations become more interesting. Share your interests, even if they're not popular. Most people conversations are boring because people hold back. They stick to topics that everyone can agree on. Avoiding anything too personal, too intense, too unusual. But here's the truth, if you want to be memorable in conversation, you need to stop censoring yourself and start sharing what truly lights you up. I'm talking about the things you are truly passionate about. The things that get you excited and make you happy. Even if they are a little unusual. I used to keep my passions secret. Especially the ones that I thought were too specific or wouldn't be interesting to others. I'd talk about the weather, sports, other topics that everyone usually talks about. I was talking about other things. Those talks didn't have much of an effect. They were just like the many others everyone else was having. It wasn't until I started talking about what I was truly passionate about, even if it wasn't popular, that I noticed a change. People started to pay attention. Not just because I was saying that when you share what you're passionate about, people might not always understand or agree with you. They'll respect your enthusiasm and authenticity. This is where things can get controversial. When you share your passions, you're being vulnerable because you're expressing what matters to you. Some people might not understand or appreciate what you care about. That's a risk you have to take. The Stoics taught that it's better to be true to yourself than to try to get others to like you. If you change who you are to fit in, you're doing a bad thing for yourself and for the conversation. Being passionate is contagious. When you talk about something you love, people can feel it. Even if they don't like the same things as you, they'll respect your commitment and I was drawn to your authenticity. I remember the first time I let my guard down and started talking about one of my less conventional passions. It was something I'd always kept to myself because I thought others wouldn't understand. To my surprise, people actually listened. They asked questions. People weren't interested in the topic itself. They were intrigued by how much it meant to me. That's when I realized that it doesn't matter if your passion is popular or universally appealing. What matters is how you express it. Passion is what makes you unique in a conversation. It's what sets you apart from everyone else. It's about being unique and standing out from the crowd when you share what you're passionate about. You're sharing a part of yourself. That's what makes the conversation memorable. You might be into something niche, like obscure films, ancient philosophy, an unusual hobby. That's exactly what can make you stand out. People crave authenticity. People crave authenticity. When they see someone speaking from the heart, it makes a deeper connection. Here's the key: don't just share your passions. Live them out in your conversations. Talk about why you love what you love, how it makes you feel, the impact it has on your life. Don't be afraid to get a little animated, to let your excitement show. When you do, you create a space where others feel comfortable sharing their own passions. leading to richer, more engaging discussions. It's a domino effect. Your enthusiasm encourages others to open up. Before you know it, the conversation has shifted from the mundane to something truly dynamic. That I once had a conversation with someone who was. They were very passionate about something I knew nothing about. At first, I wasn't particularly interested. They were so excited about it that I found myself drawn in. By the end of the conversation, I was not only more knowledgeable about the topic, also inspired to explore it further. That's the power of sharing your passions. It has the ability to inspire others. I was excited about a topic I didn't know much about. At first, I wasn't interested. They were so excited that I started to care. By the end of the conversation, I knew more about the topic and wanted to learn more. This is the power of sharing your interests. It can make others interested in the most unexpected ways. But be prepared for some people to not like it. Not everyone will like your interests. That's okay. The best thing to do is not care about what other people think. What matters is that you stay true to yourself. When you share your interests without feeling sorry for yourself, you're not just having a conversation, you're making a statement about who you are. That's much more interesting than talking about some random topic. So, the next time you're talking to someone, don't hold back, share what excites you. What drives you, even if it's a little weird or different. Speak with confidence and show your passion. I had no interest in the subject at first. They were so excited about it that I started to care. By the end of the conversation, I knew more about it and wanted to learn more. That's what happens when you share your interests. It's not about being popular, it's about being true to yourself and having conversations that are as interesting as you are. When you do this, your conversations will be interesting and memorable. They'll be filled with the kind of energy and honesty that people will remember. Avoid clichés. Original thoughts only. You know those conversations that feel like they're stuck on repeat, where you can predict exactly what the other person is going to say before they even open their mouth. That's the deadly effect of clichés, those overused phrases and ideas that have lost all meaning through endless repetition. If you want to stand out in conversation, the first thing you need to do is ditch the clichés and start thinking and speaking for yourself. I used to rely on clichés without even realizing it. When someone asked how I was, I'd respond with the usual, "I'm fine. Just." I used to be uninterested in the subject. The other person's passion made me curious. By the end of the conversation, I knew more and wanted to learn more. That's the power of sharing your interests. I'd say things like, "It is what it is," and "busy" when talking about life. These phrases felt safe, like conversational crutches that everyone used. After a while, I noticed something. These clichés weren't just boring, they made the conversation less interesting. They added nothing new, nothing personal, nothing that could create a real connection. It was like speaking on autopilot. It left me and the people I was talking to feeling empty. Here's where the Stoic approach comes in. The Stoics valued original thought, clarity of expression, truthfulness. They believed that every conversation was an opportunity. Sharing your passions can help you express yourself and connect with others. Using clichés, however, means you're not expressing yourself. Repeating what you've heard before. This is not only boring, also a missed opportunity to create something meaningful. The controversial truth is that clichés are a lazy way to communicate. They're easy to fall back on because they require no real thought or effort to articulate your own ideas or feelings. But here's the catch: if you want your conversations to matter, you have to put in the effort. If you want to be memorable, you need to take the harder path. You need to think critically about what you're saying. Dig deeper into your thoughts and emotions. Find words that truly reflect your unique perspective. I remember the first time I made a conscious effort to avoid clichés in conversation. It was harder than I expected. I found myself pausing, searching for the right words, sometimes struggling to articulate exactly what I meant. But something incredible happened. The conversations became more engaging and more alive. The other person could sense that I wasn't. I'm just repeating a well-worn phrase. I was truly thinking, feeling, sharing in that moment. That made all the difference. When you avoid clichés, you force yourself to be present in the conversation. You can't just coast along on the surface. You have to engage your mind and express what you really mean. This makes your conversations more authentic and compelling because you're not relying on pre-packaged thoughts. You're creating something new in real time. Something that can't be easily predicted or dismissed. Avoiding clichés doesn't just make your conversations become more interesting and personal when you avoid clichés. Clichés are generic and don't reveal anything about who you are. When you remove them, you're left with your own thoughts, feelings, ideas, which are far more valuable and engaging. You're no longer just another voice in the crowd, you're an individual with a unique perspective. Example. Instead of saying something like, "It is what it is," you could express how you really feel about a situation. Even if it's complicated or contradictory. Maybe you're frustrated. You're also trying to accept it. Maybe you see both the good and the bad sides. By avoiding overused phrases, you create space for a richer, more detailed conversation. You're not just throwing out a tired phrase. You're inviting the other person into a deeper dialogue. Of course, breaking away from overused phrases isn't always easy. It requires you to be more thoughtful, more intentional in your speech. You might stumble, hesitate, find yourself at a loss for words. That's okay. It's better to pause and think than to fill the silence with empty phrases. Over time, as you practice avoiding overused phrases, you'll find that your conversations become more lively and meaningful. You'll be able to express yourself more clearly and connect with others on a deeper level. Next time you're tempted to use a cliché, stop yourself. Take a moment to think about what you really want to say. Then find the words that reflect your true thoughts and feelings. It might take more effort. It's worth it. You'll stand out in conversation. Not just because you're different. Because you're real. And in a world full of clichés, that's something truly rare and valuable. Talk about what's important. Don't settle for the surface level. We live in a world that's obsessed with the trivial. From celebrity gossip to the latest social media trends, conversations often get sidetracked by things that don't really matter. Here's the harsh reality. If you spend your time discussing what everyone else is talking about, talk about the important stuff. Don't settle for the superficial. We live in a world that's obsessed with trivial things. From celebrity gossip to the latest social media trends, conversations often get stuck on things that don't really matter. Here's the harsh reality. If you spend your time talking about what everyone else is talking about, you'll never have a memorable or impactful conversation. To have memorable and impactful interactions, you need to steer the conversation toward what truly matters. Topics that have substance, depth, meaning. I used to think that to keep a conversation going, I had to stick to light, easy subjects, the kind of things everyone talk about. What's important. Don't settle for the surface level. We live in a world that's obsessed with the trivial. From celebrity gossip to the latest social media trends. Conversations often get bogged down in things that don't really matter. Here's the harsh reality. If you spend your time discussing what everyone else is talking about without much thought. I talk about the latest movies. The weather. Whatever was trending online. Believing that this was the way to stay connected. After countless conversations that left me feeling empty. I realized that I was wasting my time and everyone else's. By focusing on the superficial. The controversial truth is that most people are afraid to discuss what really matters. They're afraid to dive into deeper topics. It requires vulnerability. Critical thinking. Sometimes even confrontation. Here's the thing. Those are the conversations that people remember. The ones where you discuss ideas. Values. Experiences. Talk about what's important. Don't settle for the surface stuff. We live in a world that's obsessed with the trivial. From celebrity gossip to the latest social media trends. Conversations often get sidetracked in things that don't really matter. Here's the harsh reality. If you spend your time discussing what everyone else is talking about. The ones where you challenge each other. Learn from each other. Leave the conversation with something valuable. I remember a turning point in my approach to conversation. I was at a gathering where everyone was making small talk. I was bored out of my mind. Instead of continuing the same old script, I decided to ask a friend a question that had been on my mind. What do you think is the most important lesson you've learned in the past year? It was a risk. It could have been brushed off or made the conversation awkward. Instead, it led to a deep, meaningful discussion about growth, challenges, change. Others around us started to join in. Suddenly the entire mood of the gathering shifted. People were engaged. Reflective. Connecting on a level that small talk could never achieve. That's the power of discussing what matters. When you bring up topics that have real significance. Whether it's about personal growth, ethical dilemmas, societal issues, you can make a difference. Issues or even existential questions. You elevate the conversation. You move it from the ordinary to the extraordinary. That's what makes you stand out, but discussing what matters doesn't mean you have to be serious all the time. That it's about bringing substance to the conversation. Even if the topic is light, talk about what's important. Don't get caught up in the small stuff. We live in a world that's all about the obvious. From celebrity gossip to the latest social media trends. Conversations often get stuck in things that don't really matter. Here's the truth. If you spend your time talking about what everyone else is talking about, you're missing out on more. Example. Instead of just talking about a new movie you saw, you could discuss the themes it explored. How it made you feel. What it says about society. By digging deeper, you turn a simple topic into something more meaningful. This approach takes guts. Not everyone will be comfortable with it. Some might resist going beyond the surface. That's where the Stoic mindset comes into play. The Stoics believed in focusing on what's truly important and disregarding the distractions of the trivial. They encouraged deep reflection and meaningful discussion. Even if it wasn't always easy or popular. In my experience, when you start discussing what matters, you attract people who are also interested in more meaningful conversations. You might find that the quality of your relationships improves because you're no longer wasting time on superficialities. Instead, you're building connections based on shared values, beliefs, experiences. These are the conversations that can change your perspective, challenge your assumptions, help you grow. But how do you bring up these topics without coming across as preachy or too intense? It's all about framing. You don't have to dive into deep topics right away. You can ease into them by asking thoughtful questions or sharing a personal story that naturally leads into a more substantial discussion. The key is to be genuinely interested in what the other person has to say and to create a space where they feel comfortable opening up. Example. Instead of just asking, ask someone about their job. You could ask what they like most about their job or what challenges them the most. This lets them share something meaningful and shows that you care about more than just the surface details. Another way to discuss what matters is to bring up topics that are relevant to both of you. If you know the person well, you can talk about shared experiences, mutual interests, common challenges. This makes the conversation feel more personal and less like a debate or a lecture. Ultimately, discussing what matters is about prioritizing quality over quantity. Your conversations. Choose your words wisely. Focus on topics that enrich your life and the lives of others. When you do, you're not just having casual conversation, you're making an impact. People will remember that long after the conversation is over. So, the next time you want to have a more meaningful conversation, try these tips. Ask deep questions. Share your true thoughts. Direct the conversation towards what really matters. It might feel risky at first. The rewards of a more engaging, fulfilling, memorable conversation are worth it. Focus on solutions, not problems. Be the person who fixes things, not the one who complains. Conversations often get stuck in negativity. People love to vent. Express their grievances. List everything that's going wrong in their lives. While it might feel good in the moment, constantly focusing on problems can turn any conversation into a depressing one. Everyone feels drained, but here's the thing, if you want to be interesting, engaging, memorable in conversation, you need to shift your focus from problems to solutions. Be the person who doesn't just acknowledge the issue, actively looks for ways to fix it. That I used to be someone who, when faced with a problem, would dwell on it endlessly. I'd talk about it with friends, colleagues, anyone who would listen, thinking that by discussing the problem over and over, I was working towards a solution. But more often than not, these conversations would just circle around the issue without ever making progress. They were filled with frustration, blame, a sense of helplessness. It wasn't until I started consciously focus on solutions, not problems. Be the one who fixes things, not the one who complains. Conversations often get stuck in negativity. People love to vent, to express their problems, to list everything that's going wrong in their lives. While it might feel good in the moment, constantly talking about problems can turn any conversation into a negative one. I noticed a change in my approach. I started focusing less on the problem itself and more on what could be done about it. Not only did the conversations become more productive, they also became more positive, energizing, impactful. The controversial truth is that people often bond over shared complaints. However, this kind of bonding is superficial and short-lived. Focus on solutions, not problems. Be the one who fixes things, not the one who complains. Conversations often get stuck in negativity. People love to vent, express their grievances, list everything that's going wrong in their lives. While it might feel good in the moment, constantly focusing on problems can turn any conversation into a spiral of despair. Leaving. It might feel good to have someone agree with your grievances, It doesn't solve anything. If all you do is complain, you become known as someone who brings negativity into every conversation, a downer. Someone who drags the mood down. The Stoics taught that while it's important to acknowledge reality, it's even more important to take control of how we respond to it. This means not just identifying problems, actively seeking out solutions. When you focus on solutions, you change the entire dynamic of the conversation. Instead of getting stuck in a cycle of negativity, you focus on solutions, not problems. Be the person who fixes things, not the person who complains. Conversations often get stuck talking about the negative. People love to talk about their problems and list everything that's going wrong in their lives. While it might feel good in the moment, constantly talking about problems can make any conversation feel like a waste of time. This doesn't mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It means taking action. It's about saying, okay, this is the problem. Now what can we do about it? I remember a time when a friend was going through a tough period at work. They would constantly talk about how awful their boss was, how overworked they felt, how unfair the situation seemed. At first, I would just listen and sympathize, offering the usual supportive words. After a while, I realized that this wasn't helping them, it was just making them feel helpless. So, I decided to try something different. The next time they brought up the issue, I asked them to think about what they could do to improve the situation. At first, they were surprised. Then something changed. Instead of focusing on the problem, they started thinking about what they could do to make things better. What was wrong? They started thinking about what they could do to change it. The conversation became more constructive. Eventually they took action that improved their situation. This is the power of focusing on solutions that it not only helps resolve issues, also shifts the tone of the conversation from one of despair to one of hope and empowerment. People appreciate someone who they help people see a way forward. Offer ideas. Suggest new ways to look at a problem. It's much more rewarding and memorable to be seen as a problem solver than a complainer, but here's the catch: focusing on solutions requires a mindset shift. It's easy to get caught up in the drama of a problem, to wallow in the unfairness or the difficulty of it all, but this doesn't lead to growth or change, it leads to stagnation. The Stoics believed in focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't. When you apply this to conversation, it means directing your energy toward finding actionable steps, no matter how small, to address the issue at hand. For instance, if someone is talking about how stressed they are at work, instead of just, this doesn't lead to growth or change, it leads to stagnation. The Stoics believed in focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't. When you apply this to conversation, it means directing your energy toward finding actionable steps, no matter how small, to address the issue at hand. Instance: if someone is talking about how stressed they are at work, instead of just agreeing and saying how terrible it is, you could ask what one thing they could do tomorrow to make it a little better. If someone is discussing a personal problem, you could suggest, have you thought about trying this approach? By doing this, you're not dismissing their feelings. You're helping them shift from a mindset of helplessness to one of empowerment. Think about the last time this happened. You could ask, what's one thing you could do tomorrow to make things a little better? Or, if someone is talking about a personal problem, you could suggest, have you thought about trying this approach? By doing this, you're not dismissing their feelings. You're helping them shift from a mindset of helplessness to one of empowerment. Think about the last conversation that truly stuck with you. Was it filled with clichés and small talk? Probably not. The ones that leave a mark are those that challenge us. Inspire us. Make us think differently. If you want to stand out in conversation, you need to break away from the mundane. Speak with purpose. Ask deep questions. Share what truly matters. When I started applying these principles, everything you could say, I agree. I think it's terrible. What can I do tomorrow to make things a little better? If someone is talking about a personal problem, you could say, have you thought about trying this approach? By doing this, you're not dismissing their feelings. You're helping them go from feeling helpless to feeling empowered. Think about the last time you changed the subject. Suddenly, I wasn't just talking, I was connecting. Conversations became opportunities for real impact and meaningful connections. Let's be honest. This isn't the easy path. It requires effort, courage, authenticity. But the rewards are worth it. So, what kind of conversationalist do you want to be? Do you want to be forgotten as soon as the conversation ends? Or do you want to be remembered? If you want to be someone who makes a positive impact, you can choose to speak in a way that leaves a lasting impression. Every time you speak, you have the chance to be memorable and make an impact. Don't waste it. Be the conversation everyone remembers. Be the person who brings something meaningful to the table. The world is full of noise. There's always room for someone with something real to say. Be that person. Be unforgettable.